We are back. Today on the podcast, well, it's just me. I'll see you in a minute. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am Bill Jones, head instructor of top-level martial arts in beautiful downtown Cuyahoga Falls, coming at you today. Normally with me is my friend, my chum, my pal, my co-host, Mr. Edward Whitney, who is slightly above novice in all things. He is off this week in some grand scheme to have a vacation time. He is not able to make it in for the podcast. I was not able to procure a guest because, well, I'm sometimes lazy. So I thought, what would be interesting to do? What would be interesting to hear about? And I was listening to another podcast, and the guy was talking about his history in martial arts and kind of his journey. And I thought, well, that was pretty interesting for me to listen to, and I don't even know that guy, so I don't know, maybe it's interesting for you. Now, I am kind of shooting this out of my car because I'm doing a lot of traveling right now. So if there's a little more background noise than normal, I'm sorry. I will try to get rid of it, but no guarantees. I wondered where to start with this story. Should I start when I was 5? Should I start when I started Jiu-Jitsu? Should I start when I became what I consider actual training, meaning training that is more than just a kid duplicating moves? And the answer is, I figured, well, I'll just start at the beginning and tell you how I got into martial arts, what martial arts I've studied over the years, who I've studied with, and kind of what led me to where I am today. If you're interested, great, and let me know. Definitely hit the like button if you're listening to this on YouTube. That way I know you like this kind of content. But let's get into it. In 1984, the movie The Karate Kid came out, and I remember very vividly watching that movie. And in that movie, toward the end, there's a section where this kid does 3 jumping, spinning, inward crescent kicks at back to back to back. And that was it. I was hooked. I wanted to know how to do that. That's really all it was. I mean, I was 5 years old, right? So it didn't take much. But I wanted to be able to do what that kid did. So my mom, who worked 2 jobs at the time, took me from one karate school to another, and we eventually found one downtown Weirton, West Virginia. And the location isn't even there anymore. They built a road right where it was, so I can't even go look at it for nostalgia purposes. But the man who ran it, his name was Master Kevin Johnson. I believe it was Taekwondo. That's my understanding. But again, I was 5, so what the hell do I know, right? Started training there, and I can tell you, I remember doing a kicking contest where you were holding a leg out, and they were raising a bow staff underneath your leg, and whoever could hold their leg up the longest would win. And I remember winning that, against another kid, obviously, not against the adults. And I remember his assistant or wife, or I honestly don't know what the relationship was there. It might have just been a student. I remember her having a red gi and a black belt, and I thought that was cool as hell. And every once in a while she'd show me to punch and kick a couple different directions, and then punch and kick a couple other different directions. Looking back now, I know she was teaching me forms, but I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And they would correct me when I'm doing things. I remember I had this buddy there, and we were doing ridge hands. If you've never done a ridge hand and you don't know anything about a ridge hand, you basically make a karate chop position with your hand, everything extended, and you just tuck your thumb in, and you hit with the edge, the inside of your hand, right? Not like you're slapping them, not like you're karate chopping, the exact opposite side of the karate chop. And I remember smacking the kid beside me in the head with my ridge hand. So that's I got yelled at for that. And I remember him kind of coming out one day, my buddy, I remember him coming out of the office one day and he'd earned a stripe on his white belt, or 2 stripes or something like that. And I thought that was really cool. And, my point is, there's not a whole lot I remember. The thing I remember the most was the giant ass picture window and all the traffic outside going down Main Street in Weirton, West Virginia. So, I was 5 and I had the attention span of a 3-year-old. So, that's what I remember the most, right? It was doing that. And my mom would take me there. Oh, I do remember one other thing. We were waiting one day for it to open, and this kid was he was a green belt. He had red hair and he was a green belt. And I'll never forget this. He's walking in the parking lot, also waiting for everybody to show up. And I remember he was like Hawk and Lugs, like where you get right, and then you spit it out. But he was doing that and spitting as high into the air as he could and catching it. So it was probably one of the single most disgusting things I had ever witnessed to that point. So, I can't believe I remember that. But so that's what I remember. They taught me the basics, the front kicks, the reverse punches, stuff like that. But I was never really exceptional in any way at that point. If anything, I was probably a pain in the ass because I never paid any damn attention. So anyway, then my mom got remarried, and this is several years later. I was 9 at the time, and she got remarried. We moved to North Lima, Ohio, and in North Lima, Ohio, I continued to train Taekwondo for a little bit, but mostly just kind of at home, right? Then I forget the exact year, but I remember I was lifting weights, so I had to be a little bit older than that. But I was at the high school, or I wasn't in high school, I was at the high school. And I remember some friends going, "Hey, there's guys doing karate over there on the tennis courts." And, so I'm interested and intrigued, of course. So I go over to the tennis courts, and there's these guys doing, to me, it was very clearly not karate. It turned out they were doing kung fu. So I talked to them. I went over and they introduced themselves. One was named, Bobby. The other one was named Jimmy. Those are their real names. I figured those names are innocuous enough that I don't need to make them up. So they introduced themselves and I asked them what they're doing, and they say, "Oh, we're doing something called Pukalon Kung Fu." And I said, "Oh, okay, that's really cool. Can I see some of it? Can you show me some moves?" And they do. And it turned out Bobby had been a boxer, and he felt that like this stuff was superior to boxing. And Jimmy had never done anything else, but he was kind of tall and lanky, and he liked to kick, and it worked well for him. And it was a real different type of kung fu. If you've never seen Pukalon, and they're not all Pukalon is the same. It's a very generic term. Kung fu, quite frankly, is a very generic term as well. But this was Pukalon Te with a little bit of Chimindi mixed in. So it was very snappy and at times somewhat hard style. So if you don't know what I mean by hard style versus soft style, like a soft style is more of a absorption, right? No hard blocks, no like trying to stop movement. It's more circular in nature and more internal. A lot of the soft styles out there are the ones who come up with like the bullshit chi and stuff. So anyway, but this one was kind of like a real good blend of it. I felt like you might have like a parry of a move, but then just a straight up elbow to the face, right? Like as opposed to some kind of like, like just you stick out a finger and poke them in the eye, right? So it seemed like a really cool blend. And I asked my mom, and I said, "Hey, can we do this?" And she said, "Yeah." And it turned out the place was close enough that I could just ride my bike. We go, and it's like a 25 by 25 like dirt pit, for lack of a better term. It was a little pole barn built over literally sand. So every year we would bring in a little bit more sand so that it, to soften it up again, because it would compact in. But that's what we trained in. And I started it, and I fell in love. It had some joint locks in it. It had lots of cool kicks, and it did have some crazy hokey shit, though. I'm not gonna lie. We were doing chi things and stuff like that, and like meditation, trying to sense auras, and that wasn't like the main part of it, but it did happen. And I was a kid. I don't know. I guess I believed it then. I know it's bullshit now, but whatever. The fact is, this martial art really changed me. Like, I really enjoyed it. I really bought into it. I fell in love with it. And the other thing that we got into with that was tournaments. So we did a lot of tournaments, and just like most martial arts, this one had forms, or kata, or as they're known in the Indonesian, kombang. So we would do, I was really good at those, and we kind of made up our own. So you'd make one up, and then you'd go and you'd compete and everything, and man, I fell in love with it. And I was actually winning state level tournaments, and then national level tournaments with my kombang, and had a great time with it for a long time. Now this I studied under Master Dale McGuinness, who had studied under Master Kin, and studied a short time under Guru Barb Nagel. So that was kind of his lineage. But if you've never studied Pukulan, it had a weird history, man. I'm talking messed up, really crazy history. You can look it up in the history, like just start looking up Beaver Falls, PA, and Pukulan Kung Fu, spelled Poekelan. Another thing there, like you'll find some Pukulans that are spelled like with a U, Pukulan, and stuff like that. That's an Indonesian versus a Dutch spelling, and I don't have the whole background on that stuff, but apparently the Dutch came in and a lot of their spellings got leaked into the language. So anyway, I started looking into the history of this. I'm going to go ahead and take a break here and let you know about this history, especially the history of Pukulan Chimindi. Guru Willie Wetzel had brought it Chimindi from Indonesia to the Americas and settled in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, and had trained his top student. I mean, there were a lot of students, and there's argument about like who was supposed to, quote, take over the art and all that stuff. But for the most part, most people believed his top students were his son and a woman named Barb Nagel. And the story goes, and again, like there's not a whole lot of, there weren't any witnesses, and all we know is what police reports say. But the story goes that Guru and his son got into an argument, and through whatever situation arose, his son used a set of nunchucks to kill his father. That's crazy when you think about it. I mean, like, you killed your father. But, the argument and what's not known is whether it was truly self-defense or not. And that's the kind of stuff I have no insight on that, guys. I'm 2 generations removed from any of that. But that's what happened. He got off on self-defense and was not, did not go to prison for it or anything. So there you go. So whatever that's worth, that's what I know. So that's a crazy story. But that's kind of why things are so weird, and why, in my opinion, Pukulan didn't catch on even more than it did, because it's a really cool martial art. Lots of like hard fighting. Like when we fought, man. Like you did not like just spar for tag. You were trying to beat the ever living hell out of each other. So it was really cool. But I met a lot of great people. It was not a big school. Like I said, it was only 25 by 25, and it was a dirt pit. So you can imagine, like, most people did not want to do that. But I learned a lot there, man. I thought it was great. And I did that and clear until I graduated high school and actually left for the military. I earned my 3rd degree black belt 2 days before I left for basic training. And I competed a lot. That's what I was saying. With an organization called the Professional Karate Commission, PKC. They had all kinds of divisions in their tournaments. It was what you would call an open tournament. So, some tournaments are run by like Taekwondo associations, and the only thing you can do there is Taekwondo, just their stuff, very specific forms, And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the way the landscape is, right? And but these kind of tournaments were set up so that you could go and you could perform kung fu, and that would get judged against maybe somebody performing karate, and it was just kind of done on a point system, just like for lack of a better way to say it, gymnastics in the Olympics, right? You'd go, you'd perform your kata or your kumbang or your form, whatever it is, and judges would score you on some specified things like balance and how much power it looked like you put into things and stuff like that, and that's how you would come out of it. So it was a very aesthetic thing, and I happen to be relatively good at that kind of thing. I could do the splits, so to speak. If we're going to quote Jean-Claude Van Damme, I have the big legs, so I can do the splits. But I had a lot of fun with Pukulon Kung Fu, and it was really fun. I actually put together like all kinds of stuff to actually create an organization out of it. And this is where a very interesting story comes in, at least interesting in my mind. As I said, I was studying Kung Fu until I graduated high school and beyond, right? I was in my very early 20s before I actually kind of, what I would say, stopped studying it actively. And I had to write a 10-page paper in English class. It's just something we had to do as a senior in high school. And that was 1997. So in 1993, the Ultimate Fighting Championship kind of like burst on the scene. And this guy named Royce Gracie, Royce is how it was pronounced, but it was spelled with an R. Guy, don't even know how to pronounce his name. He bursts onto the scene, and I mean, he just destroys everybody in this UFC thing, this Ultimate Fighting Championship. And now, I was kind of a know-it-all, right? Like a lot of teenagers. And I remember watching just a little bit of it because I was like, oh, well, these guys don't know how to fight. That's why they're losing, right? Guys, if you haven't seen the first UFC, I'm not saying that the event was amazing and everybody looked spectacular. But what I am going to say is that their credentials were really good. I mean, we were talking about some legitimate boxers, legitimate kickboxers. Ken Shamrock, for God's sakes, right, was part of this thing. So it's not like they were schmoes, but I assumed they were because I was a kid and I know it all. So anyway, for my thesis paper, what I decided to write about was why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is ineffective. And I cited all kinds of stuff that I know now as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, as a guy who owns a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school and teaches nothing but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I know that everything I wrote was bullshit, but I was a kid. I didn't really actually ever test it because I just assumed I knew. And who needs real testing, right? So I wrote all this kind of crap about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I researched it. Like I went to Black Belt Magazine, which was a karate / traditional martial arts based magazine at the time, that really kind of had some very biased arguments for the most part, that of course agreed with mine. So that's where I was, and so I wrote this article, and it was. I wish I still had it. I really wish I did. Because if I did, it would be posted on the wall of my office. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. So, yeah, I wish it was on my office, or in my office now, because, it had these things written, like you got to be careful taking someone down because, there may be glass on the ground or needles or, and then it would be like, well, what if there's more than one guy and you're trying to grapple with this guy, and you're trying to do an arm bar. And once you've learned jiu-jitsu, you kind of understand it's not that way, that's not how it works. And, while those things are great, like there are plenty of standing options, right? And them, you do learn them. It's just that fighting in general, if you've never been in a fight, has a very magnetic kind of trait to it, in that people tend to just move toward each other to the point that they are grabbing. Mainly because they don't like getting hit in the face. You're getting hit in the face, and it's like, I don't like that. So you just grab so they can't hit you in the face anymore. And, so, but I didn't know that as a kid. And I'm going to be honest, once you're a trained fighter, even boxers do it, but like once you're trained not to do that, right? In Kung Fu, we were trained, don't grab, don't do that. Unless you can get a specific situation. We had lots of takedowns, so we would grab and like do a quick takedown, but and then punch the person when they're on the ground. But we wouldn't like grab them and like wrap our legs around them and all that kind of stuff because we didn't want to be on the ground. But I wrote 10 pages basically on that. So I wish I had it. But anyway, that's kind of my history, and that's going to be funny because later when I talk about how I came into jiu-jitsu and my revelations in Brazilian jiu-jitsu especially, I think it'll be kind of funny and a bit ironic. So that's what I did for my senior paper, was why jiu-jitsu is ineffective. After graduating high school, I went to college for a year. And I was kind of floundering, if I'm being honest. I wasn't getting great grades. I was doing good in some classes, but others I just wasn't interested and didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I said, hey, I'm going to join the reserves. And I decided to join the Army Reserves. And, I went away for, it was only like 18 weeks of training. And it was the whole, you train and then you do the time in the summer and, 2 weeks in the summer and then, every, one weekend a month and things like that. So I before I go to basic training, that's when I earned my 3rd degree black belt in Pukulan. And after that, I really wouldn't continue training in Pukulan too much, except for just small private lessons here and there from Master McGinnis. Mainly because I kind of lost interest, if I'm being honest. Like I said, it's a really cool martial art. But I had these dreams, and this is going to sound so weird. Let me know if you've had dreams like this. But, dreams where I'm like in a fight. And in my dreams, I would be using the moves, like the Pukulan moves. But they wouldn't be effective. Like I'd be punching a guy or elbowing him, and he'd just keep coming, right? Or I'd kick him in the leg, and his leg would just move kind of, and he'd just keep coming at me. And it was almost like a nightmare. Like, I couldn't stop this guy. So just out of the interest of learning other martial arts and getting going, when I came back from the Army, I found a karate school that was across from the place where I worked. I was a manager at McDonald's at the time, so it's not like I had an amazing job. And I was going back to school. I had decided to go back to school for exercise science. So I found this karate school, Shotokan Karate, actually under the Kwanmu Zendokai, if you're familiar with that, under Hanshi George Anderson, who has since passed. Where am I going with that? Robert Magnuson was the head of that school, and it was owned and operated by Jim Kimura and Steve Javins at the time. But Robert Magnuson's the one who he was like the Shihan, the 5th degree black belt. And it was a pretty down-to-earth school. Magnuson was a police officer, and so like there weren't like a lot of things that he did, especially him, that weren't at least somewhat effective, right? Like a lot of punching, a lot of kicking, very hardcore, I would call it. The sparring, again, was pretty good. It wasn't tag, you're it. It was continuous sparring. You didn't just stop after one hit. And so I got to say, I've been kind of lucky in that the martial arts I've found when it comes to the fighting aspect were all pretty solid. Like I didn't have any of those, you're decked out to the teeth in gear and then like you can barely touch each other. And I can tell some stories about that another time that I've seen. But it was pretty good. And of course, I was already a 3rd degree black belt and technically a sash. So if you've never been in Pukulan or karate or kung fu styles, they kind of adopted the whole rank system, and most of them adopted a sash to kind of mirror the fact that they're a soft style art and you don't have this hard style. So it was a 3rd degree black sash. Anyway, I trained karate and I joined there, and it only took me a year to earn my black belt in Shotokan Karate. And I tell people that, and a lot of them get pissed, and it's like, I don't, and I don't want to sound conceited, but I don't think you understand how good I was. It's not like I sucked. I put a hell of a lot of training into it. I knew every single form. I knew the bunk guy for every single form, which I can say was more than what a lot of people knew at that time. And that was just because of how much time I put into it. I would train at home constantly. And at the time, I had my own apartment, and, my girlfriend was living there, and now my wife. So it's what I do, right? This is what I do. I'm good at this. And so, like, people would be like, you earned your black belt in a year? That must be a McDojo or whatever. No, it took most people about 5 years. But most people weren't a third degree black belt walking in either. So it's not like I had to learn side kick and front kick and back kick and all these things. Like, I knew all that. Really, it was an understanding of the culture of the art that I had to learn. It was an understanding of the forms, or kata, and some of the background. But it was really, really fun to learn, and I put a lot of work into it. So I earned my black belt in a year. That's Shodan Ho, which was a kind of a probationary black belt. And then 6 months after that, you earn your Shodan, which is your official first degree black belt. And then, you earn basically it goes after 2 years, you earn your second degree. After 3, you earn your third, and so forth and so on. They're not automatic. You have to go pay for them, of course. But for the most part, that's all there is to it. During this time, we started doing some stuff, and unfortunately, this is when I would say I first got exposed to, like, the political side of martial arts. And if you've ever been in any sport, any sport at all, you've seen this happen, right? Like, you're a kid, you're in love with the sport, or whatever it is. Maybe it's football, maybe it's baseball, maybe it's powerlifting. I don't know. You're just doing it because you like it. And then all of a sudden, like, as you get older and you can start making decisions, like adulting decisions on your own, people start talking to you about things that you'd rather just not know about, right? Like all these, well, so-and-so is just trying to do this, and he's just in it for himself, and blah, 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 blah. And, some of that started coming up into it. And, long story short, the ownership of the school that I was at changed hands twice that I remember. There was some backstabbing and stuff. Prior to that, though, I had started going with Jim Kimura to a guy named John Vile, and he's out of Canton, Ohio, but was an uchideshi, or a live-in student at the Yagyu Shinkageryu in Japan, and he had done that a very long time. Had some very, very, very high-level credentials under them, specifically teaching credentials and things of that nature, which I'm not going to get into here. But he was a badass. I guess that's really all it is. And they had started me in this because I was teaching in their school, and they wanted all their instructors to know this information. They thought it was important. A lot of it was cultural in nature, and just like an understanding of Sogo Budo, which is like all around Budo, like Budo from the perspective of every weapon system and all that would be used in Budo being the warrior arts of ancient Japan. So you would learn staff weapons, which included things like a bow staff, but it also included like a short hanbo, or half bow, which is like a 3-foot staff, and then a tanbo, which is like a slightly shorter version. And then, we learned, what did we learn? We learned tonfa and anything that basically had wood on it. We learned that. We learned some kenjutsu, which is sword fighting. Just the basics, the cuts, the iaido, Kendall, if he was here, he likes to say that Japanese had a great sucker cut, like a sucker punch, except for it was a cut. It's one thing that was unique. Everybody wants to argue about like who the best sword fighters in history were. And when the Portuguese met the Japanese, without a doubt, the Portuguese were the best sword fighters in the world at that time. And some of their accounts went something to the nature of, yeah, those Japanese, they've got some decent sword fighting, but what they really have is they just like sucker punch you because they pull the weapon out and cut you at the same time. And that just wasn't usually done. Usually you'd like pull your weapon out and like, salute or touch blades, and then you would go try to kill each other. whereas the Japanese warriors would simply pull the weapon out and cut at the same time, which is one of the advantages that blade had, was that it was kind of wider and was good at that particular type of thing. Not getting into a debate about what blade is better, but it was not the Japanese blade, I'm sorry to say. So, I was doing all this training and I mean, just loving every minute of it. And then all this political stuff started happening, and it was like, man, it was just like shattering my life, right? Like my world, not my life per se, but my perspective on the world of martial arts and what it's about and all that kind of stuff. Because, all the behind the back stuff, it's like, where's the honor? Where's the integrity? Where is all that? And they were paying for my training. So, I really didn't have a say in it until one day when, the guy running this program calls me and goes, "Hey, Bill, where's your money?" And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Didn't so-and-so send it to you? And he goes, "No." And I was like, "Oh man, I'm sorry." He goes, "You owe me $200. And I'm like, "Well, talk to so-and-so." And he's like, "Nope, you owe it to me. That's just the way it is." I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm a college kid with no money, so that's probably not going to work out." And, long story short, I was told just, "Hey, don't come back." And I said, okay, so that's how that ended, unfortunately. And, I feel bad because, I really enjoyed that training. I think I would still really enjoy that training. I as much as I like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and probably would not teach anything else, I do very much like the Zen and the movements of Japanese martial arts. I think they're very fun to learn, and you almost like meditate as you do them. So it's really cool. So anyway, this brings us up into the where would we be here? The early 2000s. And I think the next significant event. So I was still teaching out of that place. I had kind of opened my own place at a YMCA. Or no, that didn't even happen yet. Okay, I know where we are. Yeah, so I had been teaching there and got introduced, again through Jim Kamara, to a guy named Ben De Leon, again, who is now deceased. So is Bob Magnuson, by the way. He unfortunately died in a parachuting accident. The whole nine martial arts instructors, man, they bad things happen. So anyway, I get introduced to this Ben De Leon guy who's teaching Aiki Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. And he's out of Wisconsin, and they're part of an organization that was newer, and it was called the U.S. Jiu-Jitsu Federation. And I was like, oh wow, this looks cool. And by this time, even though I was doing a striking art, I had started liking the grappling a lot. I liked it even when I was in Kung Fu. I liked like the joint manipulations and stuff like that of it. I always did. And anytime I was doing a throw or like some sort of grappling, I always felt most at home with that. So this guy comes and does a seminar at the school we're at, and I really like what he shows. And he says, hey, there's this tournament coming up in Canada. It's the Canadian Nationals, and anybody who's interested should try to go, because the day before the actual Canadian, the day after the Canadian Nationals was going to be an international tournament, Team US versus Team Canada. So I go, because I had still been competing a lot, karate and stuff like that. I enjoyed it. I go, and I'm terrible at jiu-jitsu at the time, meaning like I had lots of strikes. I had like a takedown and no grappling, like on the ground. I knew nothing on the ground at that point. And so I go, me and Jim Kamara, we drive to Canada. And, the funny thing is there's 3 people in my division. I was in the heavyweight division, always have been, probably always will be. And the 2 guys in that division, the first guy breaks the other guy's nose, so he gets disqualified. And the other guy, because his nose got broken, couldn't fight anymore, so he had to forfeit. And so I won. So I was like, oh, well, that was very, very boring. So fortunately, the guy who did the nose breaking and I ended up doing an exhibition match, and turns out this guy's on the U.S. team. And I've got a funny story about this anyway, but he's on the U.S. team. His name is Ed Schultz, super nice guy. I believe he's in North Carolina these days. Judo black belt, super good judo, pretty good at wrestling. and had some okay kickboxing at the time. It started getting better over the years. I was watching him. His kickboxing was getting better. But at the time, his striking, it wasn't even close to mine. So, like, I'm striking the hell out of him. And the way this works is you gain points. Like, they just kind of count up the score as you go. There's no stopping or anything like that. And you're allowed to strike until you get a grip on each other, right? So once, like, I grab him, there's no more striking. It now becomes kind of a judo match, right? So you're trying to throw your opponent, and then once it goes to the ground, you're trying to submit them or hold them down in a pin called an osaikomi, which would be a 20-second pin to score points. So the goal was to get some really good strikes in, which would give you an ippon or a full point striking, get a good throw in, which would give you an ippon or a full point takedown, and then an ippon, which would be a submission or an osaikomi on the ground. And if you did that before the time limit was up, you won you just automatically won. But if you didn't do that, it was just whoever had the most points at the end of the 2 rounds. It was 2-minute rounds. So I go there, and Ed and I, we actually had a pretty good match. But again, it ended early. He went to shoot a single leg, and I kicked at the same time, and I hit him right in the face. And here's the funny thing. He had just gotten disqualified for drawing blood. I kick him in the face, and there's no blood or anything, and the judges decide, they have to come together. Was I aiming at his face? Because there's not supposed to be any straight actions toward the face, like, no straight punches to the face. They can all be the side of the head, that kind of stuff. And they decided that, like, he kind of ducked into my kick as I was throwing a kick towards his chest, which was true. I mean, I wasn't aiming for his face, but it happens, right? And the minute they give me the point, they give me a full point, and then his lip just starts bleeding like crazy. He had to go to the hospital and get stitches. And the funny thing is, we're sitting later. We're me and him and Jim and this guy Carl, who was nuts. He came in from Sweden. We were sitting at a bar later, and Ed's looking at me, and he's like, "So, let me get this straight. I get disqualified for drawing blood. They give you the full point." And I'm like, "I don't know what to tell you, man." But, I actually learned a lot from Ed. He would show me some things here and there, and, he had some really good stuff. Super good judo guy. And like I said, in later tournaments, his striking got a lot better as well. He actually decided to drop about 30 pounds and went into the, two divisions lower. Anyway, so, that's kind of what I was doing. I was getting into this learning Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, and I had earned a black belt in Aiki Jiu-Jitsu. I actually had trained a young man who's now a stunt guy for the movies in Hollywood. I had trained him, and he had gone on to win the nationals in his division. So I earned my black belt in Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, and then the war broke out in Iraq, and I got deployed to the war. So that's kind of like where things took a little bit of a pause for a minute. But while I was there, I trained a good friend of mine. We found time almost every single day to train. And I got him, I trained him in karate and what I knew of kenjutsu and, some other weapon stuff. And I mean, we had a good time. We ordered wooden swords to be shipped over to us in Iraq. And I mean, we trained with them we had to look like fucking psychopaths, quite honestly, because we're there in like full battle rattle. We put on our interceptor vests and our Kevlar, everything, and just start beating the hell out of each other with these wooden swords. So we probably looked like maniacs, but and heck, I think that alone is what kept me from getting my ass kicked a couple times. I'm sure there were people who wanted to do it, and as usual, the podcast is going and the phone rings. And I'm back, and as usual, I am not professional enough to edit that out. That phone call will be there. So anyway, we probably looked like lunatics. I'm sure there were guys who wanted to kick my ass, but maybe thought twice because they saw us doing that. And to be honest with you, I didn't know Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time, so I think people would have had a much easier time kicking my ass then. But I get a letter from the guy who owns the school I was teaching Aiki Jiu-Jitsu at, because I had started teaching it. Basically anything I learned, I taught. I've always been a teacher. It's just something I've always done. Even, it's funny, in 6th grade, I was teaching math to 5th graders. like for the school. The school had, not straight teaching them, but I would come down and I would do tutoring and everything. A sixth grader teaching fifth graders. It's just something I've always done and enjoyed and kind of gravitated toward. Which unfortunately has made me look like a know-it-all on many occasions. And, I've learned to kind of try to hide some of that because, I learned how annoying that persona can be, and I didn't want that to be the case. That's just an aside, though. So anyway, I get this letter. I think it was an email from the guy running the karate school, and he says, we got this guy teaching jiu-jitsu while you're gone, but when you come back, God willing that you're safe and everything, you can teach jiu-jitsu here again. You just come in, tell him that you're taking over the class. And I thought, oh, okay, cool. So this is when I get introduced to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I come back from Iraq in April of 2004, and immediately, my second day back, I'm headed to the Jiu-Jitsu school, or the karate school. And actually, my first day back was a karate class. It was not a Jiu-Jitsu class. And I'll never forget the way Bob Magnuson introduced me back to the people, because in karate, there's a lot of turnover. So, in the 15 months I was gone, there were a lot of people that I knew that were gone, and a lot of people that I didn't know that were still there, or that had started, if any of that made sense. There's a lot of turnover. I walk into the school, and Bob Magnuson is teaching the class, and he just looks up, and he goes, Sensei Nirei, and we all bow. And he goes, hey guys, it's Bill Jones. If you don't know Bill Jones, he was in Iraq. He captured Saddam Hussein. He's back. And that was it. That was my introduction back to the school. Was like, that's Bill Jones. He captured Saddam Hussein. He's back. By the way, disclaimer, I had not a fucking thing to do with capturing Saddam Hussein, other than the fact that I was in the United States military at the time, and in Iraq. I did not know where he was. I did not capture him. I never saw him. I probably didn't even see the people who did see him. I was nobody, right? So let's make that very clear. I did not capture Saddam Hussein, but that's the way I was introduced. So it was funny. But anyway, the next time I come in, it's for this jiu-jitsu class, and I'm going to be honest, this is 100% true. I came in 100% believing I was going to just absolutely, be able to destroy this guy teaching jiu-jitsu. I was going to be way better than him, and that I was going to take over my class, and everybody was going to see how good I was, and that kind of thing. So I come in, and this guy comes up to me and he's like, hey, I'm Tony. How are you doing? And I'm like, fine. And he's got this like chew-in. If you've never met my instructor, he's always chewing. It actually smelled kind of good. And, but like, he's like very uncouth. So, he's like, no bowing, no anything like that. And I think I probably tried to bow, and he was like, oh, you don't have to do that bullshit. What are you doing? And then like, that's just how he is. And, he's like, well, what are you doing? You here to teach a class, or what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'll just take it from you for now. And again, my thought was, this guy, I want to see how bad this guy sucks and see what he thinks works, because I've never done this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stuff before. So I do want to see what it's about, but I wasn't preparing to be impressed. So he teaches his class. And, if you've never done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it can be intimidating at first, because there are all these steps, like you got to push the leg here and turn your hips there and put your knee this way and put your foot this way, and we did this basic half guard pass that led to an Americana. That's what we did the first day I was there. So we do all that, and afterwards he's like, yeah, you want to train a little bit? You want to fight? And like, rolling is what we typically call it when we spar in jiu-jitsu. And what that means is you're going to try 100% effort to win, while I also try 100% effort to win and submit each other. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And he's like, hey, let's go back here. And like, some of my friends had come to watch because they thought I was going to stomp this guy. I passed his guard and tapped him with the Americana. And keep in mind, this is the first time I'd ever seen these particular moves. And he's like, good job. Yeah, you move nice and relaxed. Why don't you go ahead out there, and, if you want to roll with someone else, feel free. And I'm like, okay. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, man, that guy was not very good. I'm definitely gonna be taking over this class soon, because I just tapped him. And if any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people right now are just laughing their ass off, because they're like, what a dick, like thinking that I knew what happened there. But, So I go out and I meet this guy, and he still trains today. His name's John Fleet, who was a Division I wrestler with Iowa. I didn't know that at the time. What I knew was that he seemed to be driving a broken down 7,000-year-old U-Haul van, and looked like a hobo. He had like hair. He was like 102 pounds maybe, and he's just this little scraggly looking guy. Didn't look tough, didn't look like anybody. And he just taps me on the shoulder and he says, hey, or he like slaps me on the shoulder. He goes, hey, just do this when you're done. And he kind of tapped me twice like that. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And I'm thinking, whatever, asshole. And, like my mindset was just not right. So, he has me down on the ground and taps me in probably about 30 seconds. And it was insane, and it was very humbling, and it was very eye-opening all at the same time, because as I mentioned, like I had kicked a guy in the face who was trying to take me down, but this guy was a Division I wrestler who looked like nobody. He didn't look like, when you think of a wrestler, you think this guy's going to be jacked and he's going to be big and strong and real muscular and all this. And this guy didn't look anything like that. And it occurred to me that I could not have kicked fast enough to stop him, like from taking me down. It would not have happened. So despite my past experience of kicking someone in the face who was trying a takedown, I knew that I had no chance against this guy. And he looked like nobody. So if he could do it, then there's probably a lot of other people who could do it. And I talked to him, I'm like, what happened? He goes, oh, that's called a single leg takedown. And, that's a very basic takedown in wrestling. All takedowns are pretty basic, quite frankly. He's like, I'll show you how to do it. And he showed me what he did. And it's a super low single. And I'm like, well, why aren't you running the class? I just beat that guy. I just beat Tony. And he's like, man, you didn't beat Tony. He let you work, dude. You just learned the move. He's letting you learn it. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, holy shit. Like, it didn't even occur to me that, of course, he let me score. And Ed and I have said this on the podcast multiple times. If you are new to grappling and you come into a jiu-jitsu school, you literally feel like a small child. And so imagine like if you were learning boxing with a small child, a 6-7-year-old, right? Are you going to just box this kid's head off? No, you're going to let him hit you a couple times because it's not going to hurt. You're going to let him do things to gain confidence. And that's what Tony had done to me. He had let me do moves so that I could get confident in them and learn them. And that's something that, quite honestly, was not done at the adult level very much in karate. Like in karate, the instructor did not lose to other students unless they were kids, because it was okay to lose to the kids because you got to give them confidence, right? So that was a really eye-opening experience for me. And when I realized it, I went back and I rolled with Tony some more, and I said, hey, can you let me work last time. Can you give me a little bit more so I can see what it feels like? And he's like, yeah, sure. And Tony doesn't like to go hard ever, really, but and he didn't go hard, but he beat me. He made it clear that it was easy for him to beat me, and that's when it occurred to me, holy crap, I don't know jiu-jitsu. Like I was wearing a black belt from jiu-jitsu, Aiki jiu-jitsu, and I realized I don't know jiu-jitsu, and that was very, very crazy. Imagine weightlifting, right? Like it's kind of like when you power lift, right? So if you've never met like a professional level, high level, world-class power lifter, you might think you're powerlifting, and then you go to one of them, and they start giving you tips and training advice, and you're like, holy crap, I've been doing things wrong. I thought I was reading books. I thought I was doing things right. And it's just eye-opening like that, right? Like it's really crazy. So anyway, I remember looking at Tony at the end of the night, and I said, hey man, do you have any white belts around here? And he goes, I don't think so. And I said, okay. So the next time I come into class, which was the following night, we did it on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, if my memory serves me correctly. It was either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday. Not that that's important for this podcast, but whatever. I had dug up a white belt from in my house, and I never wore one again. I never wore a black belt again until I earned it in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it was because I felt so strongly that while the other arts were great, there was no way any of those arts were going to serve me well against an expert in jiu-jitsu. And that's my honest opinion. That's how I feel. And I'm not saying those arts aren't good and that there aren't people who can make them work. I mean, in the UFC, you get guys who are not jiu-jitsu experts make it work against guys who are. Now, I will say with the caveat that they all know jiu-jitsu because you have to, because if you don't know it, you will get beat by it. And that's really what it was about, right? The dominance of this art from a guy who couldn't even, that started in 1993 with a guy who couldn't even pronounce his name right, Royce. It's spelled with an R. Come on, man, that should be Royce, right? If you don't understand the joke there, that's well, that means I delivered it poorly, right? But it means that you don't understand Portuguese. So that they Elio Gracie believed in starting all of his kids' names with R because he felt it was a lucky letter for whatever reason. I don't know what the superstition behind that was, but the R is pronounced as an H, as what we would look at as an H. So it's actually pronounced Royce, as though it was Hoyce. It's spelled Royce, Royce Gracie, Hickson Gracie, Hoyler Gracie. All those guys, they all have R's in their the first letter of their name. So anyway, that's kind of how I got to jiu-jitsu, and I fell in love with it, and we met Pedro Sauer, and Pedro Sauer is probably one of the most amazing jiu-jitsu and I would say just martial artists on the planet today. And if you're someone who's never met Pedro Sauer, you really should. He's on a plane of skill that most people will never understand and never get to. I've seen him just absolutely make people, I would put up videos of him rolling, and people would say, well, yeah, but what if that guy was rolling hard against him? It's like, you don't get it. That guy's trying to roll hard against him, but cannot. It's very impressive. So anyway, guys, I hope this episode hasn't been too boring. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off there. Again, I felt bad we hadn't had any episodes in the last couple of weeks, just from things going on in life. And with Ed being off this week, I wanted to make sure that we got something out here for you. So, this is a little bit of history of me, and what brought me into jiu-jitsu and how I got into martial arts in general. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them to blackbelttips@gmail.com. You can go to the Black Belt Tips Facebook page. You can send them to me on Twitter at @toplevelgjjj. I'd love to hear from you. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. Oh, by the way, if you haven't seen our South American ground karate patch, guys, this thing is awesome, right? It is about it's 6x6. It's a circle. It's got the chameleon on it, and if you haven't seen the video about the chameleon being the most jiu-jitsu-y of animals, check out Kendall Gage talking about that. You can see that on our YouTube page, which is Top Level Jiu-Jitsu. You can also see that on our Facebook page, Black Belt Tips. But we had a patch made for it. That is available, and it's only $9.99, free shipping, anywhere in the United States. So definitely let us know if you need one of those, and we'll hook you up. I'll send you the link. I'll post the link in the YouTube page here. So if you're on YouTube listening, you can check it out there and just click on it and buy one, get it ordered. And then if you are just listening on the podcast or whatever, just do me a favor, shoot me an email to blackbelttips@gmail.com, and we'll hook you up. Anyway, guys, thank you for listening. Next week, Ed will be back. Until then, I am Bill Jones, and I'm out.